Greetings, fellow game changers. This is Rich coming at you. I am in the process of doing the change from the Classic Games Redefined to pretty much the Game Changer channel. And because we're looking modifications, etc., looking to do things differently, I figured I would change the name, with it being 2017, to go off and do something along the lines of a new channel here. Going to try to upgrade the quality. I probably have to get a new computer here, but anyhow, that's what you're seeing here. So I am in the process of figuring out how to redo the greeting and everything else. Anyhow, I might end up being eventually called the Game Changer and as my nickname, but as of now, it's just Rich. I haven't managed to establish it enough yet here. But this is a follow-up video to the one we did here earlier. We're doing a series of videos on the abstraction of war in games, with a particular focus on abstract armies, chess variants, the most classic baseline center one, most noted one. If you think of war, abstracted people think in terms of chess, so we're looking at games like that there. So with this here, we're looking at arguably the weakest unit in these games here, the pawn. As I said, this is a follow-up video, the one I did about the initial placement. I went to some on the pawn. I figured I'd focus a little bit more on the pawn specifically here in the weakest unit, what it was here. The pawn is your basic frontline unit where the units will deploy behind, as you see here. You see those pieces deployed behind them. So that's what you have there with those pieces. And the pawn from Shadowrunner, etc., is basically its movement normally consists of different games doing different things. The original starts back here, advances one space, will typically keep going till it hits the back row back here, and then promotes. And bear with me 1 second. I wish this thing would not freeze up. It does, so I'm going to have to be careful what I'm doing here. I'm running this about as low as I can, but anyhow. So I'll need to be easy with the movement here. Different games did different things to deal with the weakness of the pawn and the slowness of the game. What happened in Fate HS, by the way, I'll say here, normally the pawn will capture, see this pawn here would advance forward, and then you capture to the left or the right. Normally the other one was if this pawn were advancing forward, would end up capturing that way. So it's your weakness in the front, act as a fodder or a shield for the rest of the pieces. In order to speed it up, they had it with different games doing things else. With Fit HS, they introduced the idea of the pawn moving 2 spaces forward on the first move. And that's only if it moves. So, and you'd end up having 1, if it moved 1, and only do that way there. I'll explain a little bit here what you could do with the movement here regarding it. Again, you had the pawn here to the side would capture straight ahead, and the 50 point catching to the side there like that there to the diagonal. So anyhow, so you mentioned Fit HS like this. It was meant to speed up when you had the Mad Queen or the Mad Bishop. When Chatrange became Tress, that's what happened. So they decided to speed the game up. That's what you had here. What we had here is that it's also the issue here on a larger board. You have the issue of needing to speed up play to get it. If this board were to get larger with more depth back here, let's say you would have another row or 2, you would have to do something going up here. There have been several ways they've done this. One of the way was actually to move the pieces forward. When I did my near chess, that's what you had here. You'd move it forward. That's why I did near chess. And then they'd still keep the moving a 1. The situation happened here, and this happened with chess, is that when the pawns move forward 2 spaces, you had a situation here where the pawns here, by going 2 spaces, you could bypass this piece capture. Normally the pawns are supposed to be able to exchange back and forth. You define that lines that way. That's typically in a battle. That the soldier unit, the basic pawn, the frontline unit, should have an ability to capture. So en passant came into chess and did that. It's only in the first move it does that. So that comes across when you're having movement of more than 2. When you have movement more than 2, you end up having this weird thing here. But I know I saw one chess game, for example. The board was larger. Again, you're dealing with the issue of trying to get this piece speed up because the pawns need to go and they need to promote by getting into the back row. That's one of the ways to gain material in other ways. I'll discuss a little bit of that here. But dealing with this weirdness, in the moment you give it more mobility than 2, let's say, for example, 3, you'd have that thing there. He bypasses this piece here. And then if you have a hole in a line, it's an issue. Particularly with regular chess, you would have something like the Asian style chess, Zhangi or Shogi. This piece would be blocking it, but if you're lying diagonal capture. So I've seen things, and it's utterly weird. Okay, where it goes 1, 2, 3, like that. If you allow movement of 3 spaces forward, it's totally getting off, and it really stops being a pawn at that point. What you historically know as the pawn. You end up having the Shogi lance, which is like a pawn, and then it goes forward, but it'll start in the back row, and it can rush all the way up in front, and then when it hits a certain area of the board, it promotes. So my basic view is that if you're having a pawn, it should have a maximum movement of 2. And usually I have the movement of 2 that it would be, it gets a movement of 2 so long as it's at least 2 away from the front line. It needs you limit the movement on turn 2. If a really big board, maybe it can do more than once. But the moment like here, you have the front line, which is like half the board. The moment it gets within like 1 or so of it, like that there, at that point it only moves 1, or a short moves into the neutral area, not non-setup area. So that's what I personally would recommend regarding it there. There's been other ways to speed up the game where you're doing a larger board here. What you had here was in like Shogi, for example, to move the pieces up. Number of Asian chess games have. And then what you do is, if you'll notice what happens here, the moment you move them forward, here. Let's highlight the entire thing, grab all these pieces. Hopefully I got them all. Come on. I wonder why I'm not highlighting. Bear with me one second. Move forward a second and see if I can highlight everything. We grab all those. Oh, there we go. If you do this, you would have them forward 1. If you notice there, they lose in order to speed up the movement forward, they actually lose the shielding capability. That's one of the issues you have here, shielding. So it loses that there. So that's one way to do it. You can also do that. The increased mobility is what they did there, just to speed up the game. They had that there. Then there's also the aspect of promotion. And what do you do when the pawn gets so far back? The problem with like a pawn or even like the lance is that it gets into a certain spot. And the end result is that when it gets to like the back row, it's a dead piece. So promotion comes in the way. And there are several different ways you can handle promotion with the game. One of them is that, again, it needs to do something. One of the things is that recycling, if you had a piece that was captured, and I have some pieces back here, say that was captured. I think that's a queen. Bear with me one second. Up. What we have there. That's a king. I don't want the king. Let me back up a second. Let's take the queen. I have the queen here. One way to do it was that if the piece is captured, you can then recover it with that here. I believe you had Shatranj, for example. Let me move in closer because the thing is, there it goes. It's highlighting again. Yeah, in case of Shatranj, we're promoted to a bishop type piece to move 2 spaces forward. FIDE chess has it promote to anything else. But like even in like Chinese chess or Zhangi, it gains a movement when it goes across the river of being able to move laterally this way, which is important when a king is trapped. We'll be discussing terrain effects in a future video. So that's what you have there. Deciding what to do to promote, whether it's going to promote the same uniform or a different piece that was captured or the recycling. I make a comment regarding every single game of chess is broken because they only give you 1 chess queen per side. Some will give you 2. Flipping over a rook. By the way, let's see. I'm going to see what that was. It fits. That's one thing you'll see somebody play chess do. They'll flip over the rook and call it a queen. It's not in the rules. So anyhow, put that back. So you have that there. There's another thing regarding capture, which I said, because of the way it defines things. If, for example, we have this here. Let's move this up one. One of the things that happens is normally you're going to have them, probably you want to have them like 2 or 4 away. You normally want to have engagement like this, so you're moving close. But let's say, for example, we have this thing here. Remember what I said, if you move 2, advancing forward, this was in the other video I did. If you move 2, if you notice this here, you're to a disadvantage. So you normally have 1, and then this one pairs up with that way. If you're further back and do this, and you have more turns, you're going to have a much more slower and defensive game, and usually people have found what the number of games that isn't as appealing, so they want to have the engagement closer. But let's say, example, we have this here. Okay. This one here, let's say this the board's chopped off here, whatever. Moved up 1, we advanced this one row, and you have all the pieces back there. Okay. And let's say you have the rook, etc., the pieces back here. If you allow 2, you can do that. It's still to a disadvantage, I would say. What I can do here is, let's say we can have it this way, and they start initially moving 1. But then doing that there's still a disadvantage. We're looking at the case of the spacing where the pawn start is an odd number of spaces away. What I can do here, this is an idea I had that was a mixture of the Western pawn, the European pawn from FIDE chess, and the Asian pawn. In a case where it's odd, one thing I'm going to recommend that you have with the pawn movement here is that it can capture diagonally, normally. It can also capture forward. And the reason why I'm suggesting forward when you have an odd number of spaces here is that particularly when engagement is close, that allows something like this here can come across and take. It allows better balancing for defense. And again, these are basic guidelines you have with this here. Just violating what I'm saying here. If you can allow just that odd positioning, you're disadvantaging the player goes second, because the person's going to get momentum to control the board, and that's why I recommend the idea of they be able to capture forward in the front 3 spaces here, these 3 spaces. So you have that there. That's another thing. But let's say, for example, I had a near chess, if you saw that there. We had a setup like this where the pawns can go this way. Particularly, you're doing a 4-player game on an 8x8 chessboard. That's what I have with my corner chess. Now, how do these pawns move? This is a bonus thing I have. I wasn't planning on, but I figured I'd do it this way. If you're going to do it this way, one thing is, I think the term is a sergeant. I actually saw this in another game, and I borrowed it from a chess variant. I think it was a 4-player chess variant that had it. But if you're moving the corner here, it's interesting. You can then allow the pawn to move forward, backwards, side to side. It's going to violate one of the principles you have here of the pawn should always advance forward. Simple thing. But if you're doing it that way, then they can be able to capture this way and that way. That would be, capture the diagonal. Here, if you had this one capturing that way. The reason for that is, let's say you have this back row right here. This is a promotion area. You promote that way. Those corner. You then are unable to determine which way it's going to go, and it just simply works that way. What the pawn loses is the timing mechanism when you do that, but it's still an option that you have. And actually, it's an interesting thing. You probably, if you play with a larger board, you could probably play with more pawns and put them out here. Yeah, like this here. Play with a larger board and have it this. What you have here, when you do it this way, and you would do the same here. You do it, or actually, you know what? You could do it this way. Here we go, like that. And you now have a setup for. Actually, look at this. You have 8 pieces. So you could actually play a version of corner chess that way. But generally, you'd have normally the front lines, and you'd have it, and then you'd have to decide where the pawns promote. There's another thing happening, which I'll discuss promotion before I get going here. What it was is you had like Shogi to speed up the game. What they did here was that when the pawns, or any of pieces, actually Shogi's an interesting game, the chess-like game in Japan. In that about every single piece outside the king promotes and gains an extra ability when it gets to a certain promotion area. And each piece has its own unique piece it promotes to, her own version of it. So anyhow. So you have a number of things to do. I discussed promotion, which is one aspect to it, things to keep in mind when you're doing it here. And basically, how you do this will govern the setup, the timing in the game. Promotion, normally when the pawns engage, the moment one pawn start engaging, you're going into the mid game. Usually the position early on that you have before that would be the opening, the early game, and the end game is usually when a lot of the pawns have gone away. Where they promote will also determine things also. And also the timing. That's one thing to keep in mind of how much time did you want to have for pieces to get somewhere and to get game going. So anyhow. Okay, you know what? That's about it on my end. I figured I just want to go over some pawns here, and wow, this has gone on about 15 minutes. I probably would be better off doing something a little bit different, but anyhow, you see it. I'm just breaking out Tabletop Simulator. We're pushing 16 minutes, so I'm out. We'll keep the ending the same way pretty much here. So, may your die always roll 5, and remember, don't hit the player, change the game. Okay, I'm out. We'll be uploading this video, and we're going from there. So, stay tuned. I'll be doing terrain and some other things, also looking at that and other things. So, I'm out. Good night, everybody. Take care. Thank you for your time.